We are joined tonight by Joseph Pereira, who is the author of All Souls Day, the book that I am about to hold up, as soon as I remember where I put it. Here it is. All Souls Day, the World War II battle, and the search for a lost United States battalion, which tells the story, which you'll hear tonight, of a really lost episode from World War II, but really a quite striking one, and actually a not insignificant battle by any stretch of the imagination. But it's also a very human story. It's a story about the guys that were in the war, in this battle, and also about their families and the really long-lasting effects of what happened, really over the course of two generations. Joe is a veteran reporter. He has worked for the Wall Street Journal. He was part of the Wall Street Journal team that covered 9/11 and that won a Pulitzer Prize for their coverage. He began his career, as we just found out, at the San Francisco Chronicle. More recently, he's been doing this freelance writing and book writing and reporting, and has been teaching journalism at Northeastern and at BU. And at BU, he has been part of the BU Center for Investigative Journalism. So I think you're all waiting to hear what Joe has to say, so I will let him begin. Joe, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ed and Alexandra, for putting this on. I know that there's a lot of competition going on. There's a mini series, a 4-year-long mini series on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington that has been quite interesting, and I know you're pulling yourselves away from that in order to be able to be here, and I thank you for that. I like the way that Ed refers to me as a veteran reporter. That usually means that someone is old. And so I'll take that as a compliment that I have some experience as a reporter. Thank you for being here. I do not know some of you. I know that there is going to be a large crowd here. And I do know some of you, I think. And that's not a good thing, because now I have to be interesting. Otherwise, I'll never hear the end of it. So I'll try my best to be interesting. It reminds me of a joke. What is the difference between a boring person and a boring book? You can shut the book up. It's kind of a dry joke. But anyway, I just want to make sure that this is not what some people might think, which is that it's a pompous lecture. There was a cousin of mine that called me a couple of days ago from California and asked me when I was going to give my lecture. And I said, wait a second, the last time I gave a lecture was in 1999 when I stood on top of a snowbank and I looked down on my then 3-year-old son and gave him a lecture on how to ski. That was the last time I gave a lecture. What I'm basically trying to tell you is that it's a very informal discussion. And I want it to be that way because I would really love to have input from you. And this is my 4th Zoom discussion on this book. And with the other discussion groups, I didn't really have the luxury that I'm having with you, which is that some of you have read the book. And so you can follow right along with me. You know the times and places and the inside baseball stuff that I might be mentioning. So I want you to be able to participate in this discussion. I know that as a result of reading the book, some of you have emailed me, and sometimes some of you have even called me with requests to have a personal discussion about the book. And I'm really happy about that, because it shows that it has moved you in some way. And I'm happy to do that as well. But it would be a good place for you to air your very, very intelligent questions, and so that everybody here would be the benefit of that. the benefit of your insights into the book or your questions into the book. So I want you to be able to take advantage of the chat room on the side. I won't know who you are because I can't really see. I can only see about 5 or 6 screens on my screen, 5 windows on my screen. So Alexandra will take your questions and interrupt me at appropriate times with them so that we can have a kind of a back and forth. Like I said before, this is going to be more about the book. There was one Zoom session that I had in which the interviewer took the lead and asked me a whole bunch of questions. He was supposed to do it for 20 minutes. It ended up being an hour long. Another Zoom session was more about the literary aspects of the book. And so they wanted me to explain how Stephen Crane's Red Badge of Courage fit into the theme. And so I spent a lot of time doing that. But with you, I think I'll go, right into the book because many of you have, as I've said, read the book and you can play right along with me. And I'm going to show you I'm going to show you maps from inside the book. These maps are much bigger and you can see the places a little bit more clearly. I'm also, for the people who haven't really read the book, and even for the ones that have read the book, I'm going to do a geographic walkthrough, pretend that I'm a tour guide, showing you the places in Europe, because we're Americans, we're very provincial, we don't even know where Nevada is. And so I'm going to show you where Belgium is and Luxembourg is and France and Germany and Holland and some of these places that have some kind of significance to this book.
Joe, before you jump into sharing there, we do have a quick question from Margie, who asks, how many trips to Europe did it take to do research, and was Europe the main source of your information? We also have a quick request for you to speak a little bit louder, if you don't mind.
Oh, really? Okay. Wow. Okay. How do I do that? Okay. Is this any better?
That is a little bit louder. Also, maybe sitting a little bit closer to your.
A little bit closer. Okay, there we go. So the first question: how many trips did I take to Europe? And I'm very embarrassed to say that I didn't go to Europe at all for this book. One of the reasons is that there was some budget issues for one thing, and then secondly, the more important reason is that I had the book was the contract was written up in November of 2018, and I had till May of 2019 to finish it. And I still needed a lot of research to be done, and I needed to write at the same time. And so what I ended up doing, I was panicked. I worked 12 to 16-hour days. And I was, relying on my experience. Once again, that veteran reporter reference plays a role here. I was relying on my experience of deadlines. And in deadlines in the newsroom, when the story is breaking, such as, the riots a couple of days ago, I didn't cover that, but lots of similar things like 9/11, for example, I was really in the heat of that coverage. You basically had to write your story with your phone cradled between your shoulder and your ear, interviewing and writing your copy material at the same time. And so in many ways, I was interviewing people on the phone because that would be the quickest way to get to my sources. And so I didn't really have time to go to Europe. But luckily, there was a lot of Google, and there was a couple in Ed and Anita Tybacks who live in Holland, and they supplied me with lots and lots of very, very rich detail about this land that I was supposed to know about, and they provided me lots of information. There were people in the city, in the town of Kommerscheid and Wassenaar themselves, who I contacted by phone and by Zoom, and was able to get some detail from them. I had to, of course, travel to Maryland, which is where there is a huge archive of documents. And I had to travel to Pennsylvania, where there is a couple of places that I needed to get to in order to be able to, get the documents and talk to the right people. So I did some local traveling. I traveled to Iowa, I traveled to San Francisco, and there's your answer. I didn't go to Europe. But I've learned everything on Google Maps, sad to say. What was your second question? I forget.
The second one was asking about, was Europe the source of most of your information? And also just to confirm, this is a nonfiction book, correct?
This is a nonfiction book, and I need to explain why it's called a nonfiction novel. Those of you who read Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, that book that came out in 1960, was written in the 50s. And in Truman Capote, and then later on Norman Mailer, invented a genre of literature called the nonfiction novel. Now, some people might brisk at that. I know a couple of people who always like to take me on with that title, with that name, that genre name. Well, nonfiction novel is basically a nonfiction book written as a novel. So there is color, there is dialogue, there is you write as if you are reading the minds of your characters, and I do a lot of that in this book. And you're also allowed in nonfiction novels, you're allowed to, according to Capote and Mailer, you're allowed to make up dialogue. That's the only thing you're allowed to make up. I stayed away from that because I want to stay as truthful and factual as possible to this story, so that I do justice to everyone. And so I didn't make up any dialogue. The dialogue that you see there is actually dialogue that was given to me or was taken from a document, a historical document. And so it is a nonfiction novel in the sense that I tell you, for example, what Peggy Weaver, this 6-year-old girl whose father went away to war. I tell you what she's thinking because I spent a lot of time with Peggy Weaver, and I taped all of the conversations. I listened to her over and over again, and so I feel pretty confident that what is in the book was what she was thinking, because I also checked all of my facts with the main characters in the book. I went back and told them, this is what I'm going to put in the book. Are you okay with that? And all of them were surprisingly very, very helpful and eager to get their stories into the book. There were some people, I have to tell you now, I'm maybe jumping ahead to a question. There were some families that I approached that hung up on me, I teach journalism. I always tell my students that whenever somebody hangs up on you, wait 30 seconds, take a sip of water and call them back. And if then they do not want to talk to you, then you know that you should leave them alone. But a lot of people hang up on you because they just have the shock. It's just like getting up in the morning and having cold water splashed on your face. Who is this person calling me? And they just hang up. So it's a knee-jerk reaction that a lot of people have when you call them up out of the blue. And so I did call back a few people, and I have to say that 75% of them said, no, this is too painful for me to talk about it, even though 70 years have passed. And so I respected their privacy and their pain and left them alone. But I got enough of people eager to tell their stories to be able to make it into a book. Okay, so does that answer your question?
I believe it does. I think we can jump into, we were going to talk a little bit more about the geography and getting into kind of the story that we were going to talk about tonight.
All right, okay. There was So let me get back to that question of yours about a nonfiction book. It's a little bit more than just a nonfiction novel. Those of you who have written books probably know this drill. After your book is edited and proofread and lawyered, there's a call that you get from the marketing department, and the marketing department sends you a form, and you have to fill out, you have to answer a question. And the question that they want to know is, what genre is your book fall into? And they give you certain choices. They give you history, they give you nonfiction, they give you mystery, they give you a novel, they give you romance. And I said, in my response to the marketing department, I said all of the above. And they said, no, you can't do that. You have to pick one. So I said, all right, how about this as a category? How about a historical nonfiction mystery novel with some romance in it? And they bristle at that. I think it goes, when you go to, let's say, a Barnes and Noble or a Target, well, not Target so much, but a Barnes and Noble, you'll probably find this book in the history section, because I think that's the most, I think that's the most obvious category that it falls into. Last night, I got a call from a reporter, and the reporter asked me, he wants to do a story on this book, and also a little bit about how I go about writing. And he asked me a question: how do you choose your books? How do you figure out that a subject is worthy of a book? And I told him that I look at three things. One is, can I get people to cry with this book? Or can I get people to laugh with this book? Or can I get people to get angry? Can I make people angry reading this book? And I think that, with this book, I think I can get some of the readers to cry, and they've called me and told me that they did so halfway through the book or at the end of the book. And I think that those of you who haven't read it and plan to buy it from the society, I can assure you that you will get very angry, because there are some middle chapters in there that will really, really get your goat. And I think those of you who read the book know exactly what chapters I'm talking about. And we might get to that briefly here, just to tease out a few things that you might expect to get from the book when you do buy it and read it. So that is more or less the parameters with which, I will kind of circumscribe the talk. So, I'm going to talk about how there's a lot of things in here that are very sad. And I'm going to talk about how there are some things in here that should never have happened. So, Europe. Here is the walkthrough for Europe. Let me screen share. Let's see. Okay, can you see that?
Yes, we can. Yep.
Okay, good. All right, so this is, that's the United Kingdom. Here's Germany, France, Luxembourg, Belgium. So the story it starts off in the United States to begin with, but you know that, so I don't have to show you where the United States is. Let me make this bigger here. The 28th Division, which is the 28th Infantry Division, which is more or less the major army unit that we will be talking about throughout the book, shipped from the shores of Massachusetts in Boston all the way to Cardiff here. And from Cardiff, that's where they trained quite a bit for about 7 months or so. And then from there, when they were called up to join the European fight, the European theater, many of them took a ship along the Celtic Sea here into the English Channel and came into this red spot here, which is the Virville-sur-Mer, which is basically it's Normandy Beach. It's a part of Normandy Beach, and that's where they put down anchor and got off the boat. They, as you know, D-Day was the 6th of June, 1944. They came in about 6.5 weeks later, in July 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, and that's where the action starts up. That's where a lot of that's where we really get into the war and their experiences on the battlefield. But let's see here. Let me. Okay, so from the Normandy Beach here, they move along to down this route. They move along down this route and head down to Sourdeville here. And from here, they move up going eastward over here. This is all in the month of August. They fight along some of the towns here, and they move up. My map is not cooperating with me. They move up to Elbeuf here. You can't see it. And then from there, they go to Versailles, where they bivouac on the 28th of August in preparation for the famous Liberation March through Paris on the 29th of August. Let me just clear that. I think with the added. Okay, so here's Versailles, right out. Those of you who have been to Paris, it's right outside of Paris. It's where the king stayed, and it's very, very palatial. And there's a large, very, very wide compound there where a lot of the soldiers bivouacked before. And on the 29th of August, this is what they looked like. At about 2 o'clock in the morning. Can you see that, or should I?
Nope, we can see it.
I can see it. Okay, so this is the 28th Division, Infantry Division, marching down the Champs-Élysées, very, very solemnly, and this was where the French people was so happy that they basically broke ranks, and this is what they ended up doing. They ended up hugging the GIs, the 28th Division, and in some cases, they even reached up and kissed some of the people that the soldiers that liberated them. So it's a very, very happy scene, and for the 28th Division, this was a moment of glory because they were one of the few infantry divisions that were allowed to march through the Champs-Élysées and through Paris. And right after they had their day of glory, they camped right outside of Paris here. And from here, moved eastward to they moved eastward. Oops. They moved from Paris to Nancy, to Metz, then they went through Luxembourg, fighting small pockets of German resistance all the way. At this point, after basically Paris was taken over by the Allies. Hitler said, we have to consolidate our defense systems, and he ordered everybody to retreat to the Siegfried Line, and so there was very little resistance here. It was basically here you could travel, you could cover territory as fast as you could drive a truck, and so they went all the way into Luxembourg. There was some resistance here, and from here they went into Belgium. Okay, and okay, so this is where they ended up. The Hürtgen Forest is right here. Hürtgen Forest is right here. And this is where the 28th Division, the people in our book, ended up. And this is where they experienced that baptism of fire. And this is where about 4 chapters is dedicated to. Those of you who know of the Battle of the Bulge, the Battle of the Bulge was fought right here, about 50 miles away. The Hürtgen Forest started in September and went all the way into February. It was a long, drawn-out battle. The period that we cover is very, very short. It's just 1 week from November 2nd to November 9th, which was when the 28th Division was in the thick of the battle at the time. The reason that we had the Battle of the Hürtgen Forest was because of a failure up here. And those of you who have also followed history would know that that this was an attempt right here, Eindhoven, Nijmegen, and Arnhem. I think I'm bringing up these names because I think they would ring a bell. There is a Operation Market Garden that is referred to by the military, but more familiarly, there is a book called A Bridge Too Far, written by Cornelius Ryan. And A Bridge Too Far was basically a failure of the Allied forces led by the UK's Montgomery to try to breach the German defenses, which was right along the Siegfried Line, right along here, to get into this area here, which is where all of the ammunition, the tanks, the airplanes, and the bombs were made. This was the industrial belt. And it actually goes all the way into Cologne and Bonn. And so back in September, between September 17th to September 25th, it was a 9-day disaster because they couldn't get to a bridge in Arnhem in time to be able to defeat the Germans. Because that failed, the onus fell on the Americans, basically, to okay, it's up here. The onus fell on the Americans to be able to get in to behind the German ranks and infiltrate this area right here for the same purpose, to be able to disarm them and to take away their firepower. And so that was the purpose of the 28th Infantry Division. And the 28th Infantry Division, this is where you might get a little angry, was basically asked to sacrifice themselves. It's almost like a sacrificial lamb. I'm using a religious term here, because there was another general by the name of Joe Collins, who was very, very prolific as a general and as a tactician. And they wanted him They thought that he had a better fighting force, and they wanted him to be able to get in to German territory with little resistance. And so the 28th Infantry Division was asked by General Eisenhower and Omar Bradley, who was the second in charge on the American side, to offer to fight the Germans, through this very, very thick forest, and so that they could keep the Germans occupied here while Joe Collins and his 7th Corps was able to slip through the sides there and then make their way to the Rhine River here and disarm the machinery, and then from there to go on to Berlin, where Hitler was holed up. So that was more or less the plan. But and the plan was also to fight the Germans on a large chunk of land that went along more or less the Siegfried line from about here in southern France all the way to up here and to Nijmegen and on to Antwerp, which is up here. So here was a huge front where there were about 9 infantry divisions stationed. And on the 2nd of November, all of these armies were to launch into action so that they could engage the German army, thin their ranks by being spread out so widely. And then, so that would make the German resistance less, less potent. And that was the plan. But on the 2nd of November, none of these infantry divisions, none of the generals gave the command to launch. And the only one who launched on that day was General Koda with his 28th Infantry Division. So the Germans, who were kind of regrouping here, Model and some of his other leaders that were trying to regroup here and figure out how to defend against this huge onslaught of Allied forces, all he had to do was just bring 3 of his armies right here to take on the 28th Infantry Division. That was really the bloodbath that resulted because of the fact that the Americans were sending only 1 division when they should have sent 9 divisions into battle. And later on, if you have any questions, I'll try to get to that, to get more into the battle about why it was that the Americans that the American Army, the 28th Infantry Division, should not have launched a battle on the 2nd of November. Okay, so let's see here. Are there any questions so far about the geography? This is the Siegfried Line, and the Americans were over here. The Canadians and the English were over here, and they were all going to try to break through the German front to decimate their firepower, to demoralize the army, and go to Hitler, to Berlin, where Hitler was. And they wanted to do all of this by Christmas. There was a famous saying that Eisenhower, for political reasons, marketed over the United States through radio back then about how the boys will be back by Christmas. And because of that, there was this huge rush to send these young American boys into battle. And for the generals, you become a better general. I learned this researching this book. You become a better general by soldiers dying for you. Because when you're a general, you basically have to experiment with new stuff. You have to get into uncharted territories, and the only way you can do that, the only way you can win wars back then was by spilling the blood of young men, and so for them, the way to get their boys back to the United States by Christmas was by spilling as much blood as was needed, so that the people in America could clap their hands, and then later on elect General Eisenhower as one of the presidents of the United States. So that's more or less the politics and the military behind this. Are there any questions so far before we move on?
Not about the geography, and just as a reminder, anybody can send in through the chat function there. You can send in questions as we go, but we don't have anything about the geography, so I think you're good to move.
Okay, so let's move on. Okay, just bear with me for clicking away and taking off some of these maps here. Let me bring in. Let's see here. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So this is the first town, Wassenack, that was that the 28th Division had to attack and take. This was Wassenack. It was very, very thinly populated. Most of the people that live here were farmers. As you can see, there, just lots of farmland, lots of corn, lots of vegetables that they grew for themselves as well as to ship to neighboring towns. And all of the people, all of the villages, of course, were evacuated in September in anticipation of the Allied forces moving in. And so basically here, there were just a few German soldiers, a few German units that were stationed. And because this place was easy to bomb, there was a lot of bombing that went on before the Americans sent their soldiers in. And so all of the German soldiers were hiding out here in the valley and in the mountains there, so that they would not be bombed to death here. And the only two pockets that were manned by German soldiers were right here. And so it was pretty easy that first day for the Americans to move in. But I'm telling you this because this is the only victory that the Americans enjoyed during that 1 week battle. Let's see. From there, they went to, let's see. The next battle that was fought was in this town of Schmidt, which is about 2 miles from Wassenack, 2 or 3 miles from Wassenack. And the Americans also, on the 3rd of November, came in here, and they they came in here at around lunchtime on the 3rd of November. They surprised some Germans who were riding bicycles after they had a nice meal, and the Germans were not expecting the Americans, and they took over this. They took over this town, which is also not. It was a little bit more populated than Wassenack, but it was not very heavily concentrated with places to hide for the Germans, and so from about 2 o'clock in the afternoon to 2 o'clock in the evening, they were just waiting for the American tanks to arrive so that they could fortify this place against the Germans, who were expected to come the next day. But the tanks were bogged down in this very, very narrow trail that was very muddied from a whole month of rain, and nobody foresaw that. And so the tanks were about 2 or 3 miles away from this place. And on the 4th of November, the Germans just came down from, they just surrounded the Americans here from the north, from the east, and from the west. And this was the beginning of the bloodbath. So on the 4th of November, the Americans had no choice but to retreat back to Komashite, which is in this direction, about 1,000 yards away. And even in Komashite, they were not able to set up defenses because the tanks were not there. They hadn't arrived there on time. And so there was another bloodbath there. And they eventually pulled out of this area of Wassenack, Schmidt, and Komashite in less than a week, and it was a huge embarrassment for the American Army. They to give you an example, in Normandy, the casualty rate was 7%. In the Battle of the Bulge, the casualty rate was 13%. In the Battle of the Hurtgen Forest, which that included about 9 battles over a period of 5 months, the Hurtgen Forest took the worst beating, and the casualty rate was 33%. In this particular battle, which was Wassenack, the battle that was fought from November 2nd to November 9th in the towns of Wassenack, Komashite, and Schmidt, in this particular battle, the casualty rate was 64%. And so this was the worst defeat that the Americans suffered in Europe during World War II. And the reason for that is, well, you have to read the book for that, but the reason for that was that, there was a lot of politics. Like I said, they wanted the boys back by Christmas so that they could make the American people happy. And they also really didn't have any other choice except to win battles. To win battles, you had to put lives on the line. And that was more or less the modus operandi of the American generals at the time. So so much for the geography of Europe, and particularly of the Battle of All Souls Day battle. So let's now move to why I thought that this was a pretty good story to put into the book. There might be a question along those lines. Let me see here. Okay, here's the town of Komashite. Okay, and this is where this was a part of the story. When I came to it, I really got impressed. And this is where Stephen Crane comes into play. There is a very, very thinly layered American defense system over here and along this the outline of this town here. And the tanks that were all caught up in this trail were caught up over here somewhere. They were not able to negotiate down this trail and come to the aid of the American soldiers that were here in foxholes waiting for the Germans to attack them on the morning of the 6th of November. And over here were about 18 American tanks, Sherman tanks, that couldn't move once again because there was no room on the trail. And as they sat here on the morning of November 6th, they could see 16 German tanks, Panzer tanks, coming down the hill at them from this angle. And all they had was M1 rifles. They had foreseen this on the 5th of November when there was this panic escape that it was a stampede to the rear of the battlefront over here so that they could get away from the Germans who were just too overpowering for them. And there were thousands of soldiers that ran in this direction from from around here all the way up this trail and into Wassenack, which is the town that we saw. Wassenack was in the hands of the Americans, and there was just a stampede of soldiers retreating in panic. If you read the book, the generals, not the generals, but the colonels and the captains tried to grab them by their collars to keep them from running away, because they needed their guns and they needed their presence to defend against the superpowers of the German forces. But they would just shake loose from the grips of their colonels and captains and run down this trail up to the other side of the hill. And the reason that I thought that this story was really very, very poignant was because there were a handful of soldiers. There were about 200 soldiers, American soldiers belonging to the 112th Regiment, who were here, and they didn't budge. They didn't move, and they stood there and they sat there, crouched in the foxholes, knowing that they were not going to be able to defeat the tanks that were coming at them the next morning. And the night before, the Germans, this is where the Germans were also humanitarians. They were a little bit sympathetic to the Americans who were just sitting here like sitting ducks. And so at night, they came down these slopes here, close enough for the Americans to hear them. And they said to the Americans in English, do you want to give up? Do you want to surrender? The Americans didn't reply back. All they did was shot their guns into the air, to the night air. And that was their signal to the Germans to get lost, that they were going to defend their positions the next day. And the next day, the Germans came in down with 16 tanks against 200 American soldiers. It was just no match. And they just stood there and they fought back as much as they could. So this was the reason that I thought, this bravery that I thought, was not told by historians or by people like Cornelius Ryan. I thought that this story needed to be told, and that's why I happily took I happily took up the offer to help Jack Wilson tell the rest of this story. And there is let's see here. Once again, this is frozen. I don't know why. There is a passage in Stephen Crane's book that it's right here. Okay. Oh no. There is a passage in Stephen Crane's book called The Red Badge of Courage. And in it, Stephen Crane writes about cowardice and bravery. And Stephen Crane, as you probably know, is an 18-year-old who is just overwhelmed by the chance to show off and to show how brave he is against his mother's wishes. He joins the war, the battle. This is during the Civil War. And he is confronted for the first time by the enemy. And the approaching enemy, this is what he calls the approaching enemy. It's an onslaught of redoubtable dragons. And he waited in a sort of horrified listening attitude. He seemed to shut his eyes and waited to be gobbled. A lad whose face had borne an expression of exalted courage, the majesty of he who dares give his life, was at an instant smitten abject. And he too threw down his gun and fled. There was no shame in his face. He ran like a rabbit. And so, that is exactly what I would have done. I would have run like a rabbit at the sight of these redoubtable dragons, the enemy coming at me with such force. And I would have been one of those people on the 5th of November, just running along here up the valley into safety. But these soldiers stood and stood their ground. And for that reason, I really, really, fell in love with the story. And after that, I tried to find out, Jack and I tried to find out who some of these soldiers were that stood their ground, and we contacted the families and tried to get as much as we could from the families. The families were pretty much, they were flabbergasted by this because they had very little information other than the letters that their soldiers had written to them from the battlefront. And so they shared their letters with us. And I got that part. I got a little bit of their thinking from the letters that they sent back to their families. But I basically had to get myself to the archives, the National Archives, where I had to do my research. And let's see. And somebody asked if I was, somebody asked how much research I did. And this is basically what I had to do in order to be able to learn enough about this battle and about the circumstances around it to be able to write a moving story. I had to read most of 31 books. I had to read 30 newspapers and magazine clips. I had to read basically 2 diaries of generals. I had to go to 3 museums. I had to set myself down in 2 national archives, one in Maryland, in College Park, Maryland, and one in St. Louis. And I had to go to the Military History Institute in order to be able to get those aerial shots of the battle. That was the only place that had them. The National Archives in College Park didn't have them. I had to go to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, in order to be able to find these maps and also to be able to get the copyrights for them. Because if you have to deal with photos in your books, those of you know copyright laws, sometimes it's a pain, and you have to drive 200 miles in order to get one copyright permission. That's basically what I had to do for that. And I had to go to a presidential library, university libraries, public libraries, private collections. I had to FOIA documents. FOIA means that you have to get the documents because they're not available to the public, but you have to get them under the Freedom of Information Act. And there were 147 declassified Army documents also that I had to consult in order to be able to write the details of this story. In order to be able to write a nonfiction novel, I needed a lot of color. I needed a lot of details. I needed to know what the weather was and what the generals were saying to the soldiers. And all of that was contained in these documents, which were battlefield reports written by soldiers bleary-eyed from the war, tired and hungry, but yet going to their little Underwood typewriters and banging out the day's events so that it could be read in posterity for people like me who would come along 75 years later and wanting to tell the story of these brave soldiers to people like you and to American readers. So that's basically the reason that was the kind of the main motivating force for me to get into this story. I want to open it up for questions. I want to ask you, those of you who've read the book, I want to ask you if you have an idea of a fatal flaw, and this kind of is sort of the literature part of the book. In every piece of literature that's worth its name, there is a flaw, and there is a hero or an anti-hero that has something to do with the flaw. There is a fatal flaw in this book, and basically, I wanted to see if anybody would venture a guess as to what that fatal flaw was. I want to do it without giving away the book for those who haven't read the book yet. But I want to open it up for questions. I know that I overextended my time. I'm sorry for that. There was some technological glitches that I hadn't foreseen. Did you get angry at the generals, at General Cota, for what he did? Did you get angry at Eisenhower for the political motivation that he had? Did you get angry at Omar Bradley, or did you get angry at the Germans? Those of you who read the book, what was your reaction?
So just to jump in here for a second, we do have a couple of questions from people talking, general questions at this point, one of which I think you already have talked about a little bit, where you just talked about where, some of your resources, particularly, your photographs, where they came from. I think you specifically the aerial ones, you talked about that a little bit just there. And then we also got one more specifically about the battle. You mentioned that there were 200 soldiers who stayed, but how many troops were involved on the U.S. side total?
On the U.S. what? On the U.S. side?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So the 28th Division was composed of 3 regiments: the 109th, 110th, and 112th, and each regiment had about 3,000 to 3,500 soldiers. So you multiply that, let's say, by 3 times, you get about 10,000, 12,000 soldiers, maybe 15,000 soldiers, because there is also an armored division, and there's a tank unit that accompanies. There's a unit that does pre-launch bombing. So they bomb when this battle was launched at 9 o'clock on the morning of November 2nd. It was preceded by 1 hour of constant bombing. Over 1,000 bombs were dropped on those 3 villages and in the forest around there on the Germans before the Americans actually got out of the trenches and charged forward. And so there are about so the 28th Division had about 1,500 soldiers. In addition to that, there were the 707th Tank Division, and there was also a reconnaissance division. There was a 5th Corps, which was backup to the division. So the 5th Corps was also a huge, maybe about 10,000 soldiers there. So on this given week, there were about 30,000 American soldiers right in that area, which is about a 10 square mile area.
And then also one more, we have a couple other questions too, but one that was also specific about the battle was, do we know why the armies did not attack on schedule on November 2nd? Was it bad weather that stymied air cover during the tragic tank attack?
That's a very good question. Yes, I showed you on the map how the American divisions were stretched out over about 150-mile radius. And and the other infantry divisions refused to send their men to battle on the 2nd of November because it was too cold and too rainy. It had rained a lot. So this battle was postponed for at least 3 days. They were supposed to attack on the 31st of August. They didn't because the weather was bad. Supposed to attack on the 1st of November. They didn't because the weather was bad. So on the 3rd, on the 2nd, Eisenhower was just and under him, the general for the first, his name is escaping me right now, Hodges, General Hodges, was really very anxious to get through the German ranks, because there is a letter, those of you who read the book, there is a letter from General Patton to his wife. And if you want to get angry, you can read that letter. There's an excerpt of that letter in the book in which he says to his wife in that letter that I have to beat Hodges to the Rhine River. The Rhine River was where the industrial belt was. Whoever got to the Rhine River first from there could make a beeline to Berlin and get the head of Hitler. And so for the generals, it was mostly a game. It was a contest of egos. And even General Patton, on this particular day, on November 2nd, did not think it was good to send his troops into harm's way. And so the only one who sent his troops was General Hodges, and General Coda was the hatchet man for him. So General Patton eventually made his breach into German territory on the 16th of November. That is, 14 days, 16 minus 2, what is that? 12 days later. And he made a name for himself after that, but Coda made a name for himself definitely in a bad way. He went from being a superstar on the beaches of Normandy because he was the one who told the Corps, lead the way. And he became famous because of his daring do on the beaches of Normandy, because he liked to lead his army from the front. But in this particular case, he had to lead his army from the rear, and he didn't do a very good job. So his name remains an ignominy for history, literally. And Patton is sort of the glory hog, and Hodges to a certain extent. Eisenhower, is complimented for winning the war eventually. So does that answer your question?
Believe it does, yeah. So in terms of, we've got another question asking about your co-author, John W. Wilson, and would you mind describing what his contribution was?
John was the originator of this book. And in 2010, I'll tell you the story very briefly. In 2010, in 2009, on the morning of June 10th, in 2009, he logs onto his computer and he sees on his computer screen an old pair of army boots from World War II. And he wonders whose boots those were. But he has things to do. So he logs off, he clicks off his computer, goes and does his chores and comes back. 2 hours later, he can't find the boots. He looks and looks and looks all day, can't find the boots. And he remembers that it was on the Boston Globe website that he saw those boots. And so he goes to the Boston Globe offices in Dorchester, and he asked them to look for the photo of these pair of boots. The Boston Globe themselves, with their sophisticated, very, very capable staff, was not able to find those boots. So he took that, he's a religious man, he took that as a sign from God that he had to find the owner of those boots. And he looked, he did his own research. He tried to find who, whose boots they were, tried to find who the photographer was. One thing led to another. So you have to fast forward to about 2016, 2017, when he was struggling with the material that he had and needed somebody to help him. So that's when I came into the picture. And I immediately, like you said, I glommed on to his idea. I volunteered to help him. At that point, I realized that there was a lot of work still to be done. And so I asked him if he wanted to help. He had already done a lot of research on the boot. And should I give it away, Ed? Should I give away this part of, what I'm going to say, right? Should I tell those who haven't read the book?
Yeah, I think at this point, I think you've crossed the Rubicon on it. Yeah. Okay.
So Jack Wilson finds the owner of those boots, and you may have guessed it. Those boots belong to his uncle Jack Farrell, who fought in this battle But at the time that he saw those boots on his computer screen, he thought that his uncle Jack Farrell had perished in the Battle of the Bulge, which was about 50 miles away, and not in the Battle of the Hurtgen Forest. And so he was really very confused about how this could be his uncle's boots, because his uncle was in the wrong battle. And so he did a lot of research about his uncle. And he came around to finding a few soldiers that fought along with his uncle. That's where I pick up the story. And he wanted me to get the book published. And so I had to do what I had to do. And I had to, like I showed you, I had to go to all of those sources, talk to all of those people in order to be able to pull this book off. One of the big challenges on my part was to be able to get the Army to talk about this battle, because the Army kept this quiet. The reason that you know about Operation Market Garden was because of the author, Cornelius Ryan. He actually did a lot of research, and he was the one that made Operation Market Garden come to the public's attention. That was also a major failure. And this was a major failure. The Army doesn't like to talk about its failures. And so my challenge was to find someone within the Army ranks to be able to talk about this battle. There was very little written about it. And so one day I happened to find the name of a professor who teaches a course specifically about this battle, about the All Souls Day battle. He teaches a course in the Army Command and General Staff College in Fort Leavenworth in Kansas. So I emailed and called him. He didn't return my calls, but he did respond to my email. And I thought he was going to say, well, you're going to have to talk to the public information officer, get his permission before you can talk to me. That's usually the general rule. The Army doesn't like, general people of important stature talking to reporters because they can never control the information. So I thought that was the answer he was going to give me, but instead, his name is Thomas Bradbeer. Those of you who read the book will know how much of a hero he is and how much of a brave man he is. He's very unusual. He said to me in an email, "When can we talk?" I was floored. And at that point, I knew that, that at least I got it into this very, very secretive battle. And I was expecting 10 minutes on the telephone. During the first interview, he gave me 2 hours. And after that, he knew that I needed more information. He gave me 2 more hours. And after that, he gave me 2 more hours. So a total of about 6 or 7 hours he gave me. And he explained to me why battle is not really talked about much. In fact, a lot of his students coming in, his students are high-ranked military officers who are learning learning battle tactics and learning historical data on how to be able to command today. And this battle is very, very important information to them. And he says that even these military officers coming into his class have never heard of the Battle of the Hurtgen Forest, never heard of the All Souls Day battle. And so, he was a big breakthrough for me. And I think I gave you more than your answer.
That's perfectly all right. I do want to, there's sort of a couple statements and questions here that I kind of want to summarize a little bit. Several people who are commenting with their experiences or feelings about when they read certain sections of the book. But the theme that I'm really seeing as I'm reading through them is having to do with the story of the families waiting at home, and then also the retrieval efforts of the, bringing the remains of these young men home again. And so I sort of have some statements about that, but also some questions. So maybe if you want to talk about that a little bit, specifically saying, there's one asking, can you talk about the impact on the families of these soldiers that never returned? And then sort of a two-parter there for you is that, is there an effort, since the book does seem to denote that there is some knowledge within the residents of the Hurtgen Forest area that we're aware of the location of some burials, and is there an increased effort to recover some of those remains?
Okay, those are very good questions. I take it Ed is going to give me permission to spill the beans to some extent. Okay, so your first question goes to the reason why I took this book up as a project. I was looking for emotion, and I was looking for reasons for people to cry, and I found one in the story of Peggy Weaver and the Weaver family, which lives and lived in Spirit Lake, Iowa, which is in the northern part of Iowa. And I was very, very moved by her story, not so much because she, as a 6-year-old girl, terrific memory. She had memory that really allowed me to make this into a novel, because she remembered lots of detail, lots of color. She gave me a lot of that. But the story that she told me that made me drop my pen, I was taking notes, I was also recording it, was the story about her father. Her father was waiting for his son, Sidney Weaver, who went off to war at the age of 32, to come back from the war so that he could build a multi-million-dollar resort right by a lake. Spirit Lake has 5 lakes, right by a lake, because he had property sitting right on top of the lake. And right next to the lake was a beautiful park where there could be a lot of day trips and a lot of picnics. And back then, this was an area that was waiting to be developed. And it was a gold mine for him. This was in 1944, and he waited for his son to come back before he could start his project. And he waited and waited and waited and waited. And in 1964, I think, he died, waiting for his son to come back. And while he was on his deathbed, he was still waiting for his son to come back, sort of in the back of his head, thinking that I need him to be here so that I could start this business. He died not very wealthy, because obviously, well, he may have had some money, but obviously he missed this whole gold mine, this opportunity to turn it into a resort. That his second son, Sidney was his oldest son, his second son couldn't wait any longer. So he went across the lake to the other side of the lake, and he built exactly what his father had in mind. He built a resort, a vacation resort for where people could come and spend money and have a good time. And he became very rich. And every summer, when the place would just fill up with visitors, with vacationers from states all around Iowa, coming there, he would look on to the other side of the lake, and he would cry for his dad. And I'm sorry, I'm getting a little emotional about it. And that story really got me. And I knew that at that time that I needed to tell the story of the families of the people that were affected by this 1-week battle, where there was a bunch of soldiers who did things that I would never have been able to do. They just sat in their foxholes and faced the redoubtable dragons. And I was not able to do that. I was someone who ran like a rabbit, in Stephen Crane's words. And so, this is one example. There are other examples. Those of you who read the book, I just, in places when I was interviewing these people, I had to stop, just like I did right now. I had to stop to control myself, to wipe away my tears, and I think I reflect some of that emotion in the book. And I have had people call me and let me know that while they were reading a book to other people that had a little bit of eyesight trouble and couldn't read the words themselves, that they had to stop and control themselves because they were teary-eyed, just like I was. And so, this is the other theme that runs through this story, in addition to the the bravery of these soldiers, of these Henry Flemings, in a real life story, All Souls Day. In addition to them, the families just were devastated, were destroyed. And those of you who read the story of Peggy Weaver know that she carried this pain every day, every night. To this day, I spoke to her after the book came out. I exchanged emails with her after the book came out, and she told me even now she's waiting for her dad. She cannot get it out of her mind that this man, this 32-year-old loving father who left the front door back in August of 1944 is not coming back. She's in her 80s now, and she's still waiting for them. And they're not making this up. This is actually going on, playing over and over again daily in their minds. And it's very painful. There's another a woman in Georgia who is dying to go over, and this answers your second question, Alexandra, who is dying to go over there. Please let me know where, if he is dead, let me know where he's buried so that I can dig the ground with my fingers. And this is an older lady, and she wants to dig the ground to find her brother who left her in November of 1943. He left a little bit earlier, and he had a big smile on his face. She was 8 years old, and she will never forget that day. And she relives that day every day in her life. Even today, she grew up. She grew up from her childhood. She raised a family, and she is still cut up by the loss of her brother. She still thinks that he's coming back. Of course, she resorts to reason and knows that he's probably dead over there. And so somebody asked me a question before, and Alexandra, you just said, how do they go about finding the remains of these soldiers? And was I able to find the remains of these soldiers when these families for 75 years, calling and writing letters to the Army, got no answers? How was I able to do it? Well, this is kind of a dirty secret, okay? And this should also make you mad. There are files that are classified for a period of time after a war is over. And that period of time is usually anywhere from 25 years to 50 years. In many of these files, the files were basically opened up to the public in the 60s and 70s. And some of these families some of these fathers and mothers who went to their graves, not knowing what happened to their son, they actually had access to information that they could have gotten a hold of had they only known journalism, okay? Or this should be taught as a civics course in every high school. What it is that you need to know to be able to survive, to be able to live your lives in decency, and what it is that you have access to. These files, and these are called IDPFs, which is individual deceased personnel files. These are files that the Army kept on each of these soldiers. And if you went to one of these files, today you can get it online. You have to pay $80. You can order it. You have to wait two months to get it. But if you, for instance, drove to St. Louis and went into a big 8-story building, you would be able to find a file on your uncle or your brother, so it's just sitting there, and you have to start with that. And after that, after you get the details of your soldier from these files, then you have a kind of a torchlight to see which road you should go on, which road you should take. Most roads lead to College Park, Maryland, which is the National Archives. It's the biggest national archives for World War II. And there on the 9th floor or the 8th floor, you can find what you're looking for. That's basically what I had to do in order to be able to find out every single detail about these soldiers that I wrote about in this book. There are 147 documents that are declassified. I showed it to you early on. And those documents hold the clues to where your uncle is. If you've got a moment, I know I'm way over time. I'm going to show you how this is done. Let's see here. Okay, so for these soldiers, if you can see this, can you see this?
No, we need you to share your screen one more time.
Oh, share the screen. Okay, all right, there we go. Okay, so this is a actual battlefield map. Now, I know that this battlefield map is not available in College Park, Maryland, but I am now making it available to everybody who wants to see their, to find out about their loved ones. In this particular story, the main characters in the story, the soldiers that were really brave, were right in here. They were right along here, okay? And some were here and some were here, okay? And the German tanks came right at them. They were one of the first to get hit. They just came down the hill, blasting away. And if you noticed, if those of you who read the book, I'm not making this up, there is a soldier that actually survived this attack. He is from Ohio, and he gives an interview to a local newspaper in Ohio, and the newspaper is referenced in the sources and in the footnotes, and his quote is used. He said that I was in a foxhole when these German tanks descended upon us, and they blasted away at us. We had absolutely no chance at all of surviving this attack. And when he blanked out for a moment, and when he came to and opened his eyes, he saw German soldiers standing around him, and he said he couldn't explain why they didn't shoot him. Instead, they took him prisoner. The soldiers that were with him, I'm not going to mention who they are, so keep your suspense. Some of them were shot, and so the German soldiers, they just all you had was an M1 rifle, which is like a 22 rifle, and it had no chance against a tank. And he said he looked at his rifle; it was broken in half. It was melted and broken in half. So this was a guy from Xenia, Ohio, who described the battle scene firsthand. His description is in the account of the descent on November 6th by the Germans onto the Americans. So what basically you have to do is, you take this battle, you find out where your loved one is. It doesn't necessarily have to be in Komushite. It could be in Schmidt or in Wassenack, because there are soldiers also there who are fighting. And what you have to do is you have to once again, you have to take a Google map. I had it on there. I don't know what happened to it. Let's see here. Nope. You have to take a Google map and basically overlay it over this battlefield. And one good thing about Komushite, I'm just using this as an example. One good thing about Komushite is that this town hasn't changed that much. The population is now about 1,000 people. Back then it was about 200 people. But this road here is just like it is. And there are branches that go off there, You will see that there is a pretty good development. Let's see here. You'll see that there's a pretty good development of houses all around. But what we found out from about the graves of 10 soldiers that have since been, over the last 75 years, since been disinterred, is that these soldiers were buried pretty close to where they died. And those battlefield reports give a pretty good account of where these soldiers breathed their last. And pretty much where they died was where they were buried. Give or take maybe 5 yards or 10 yards. Because when the German villagers came back to Komischeit after the war was over in April of 1945, they didn't really have time to find cemeteries. America was still in the thick of war. Hitler was still, in April, he died in the beginning of April, but the German army was still in a kind of a fighting mode. So they didn't really know what to do with the Americans. So they just buried them in the ground close to where they were found. And if you do your research, and you can find by going to the IDPFs and going to these maps going to the reports in College Park, Maryland, and using these maps that I'm now making available, you can pretty much find out where your loved one most probably died, was killed. And you can go to those houses today. You can go to those houses today. Okay, let's see here. You can go to those houses today. Okay, can you see this here? Oops. Can you?
We're still looking at the same map.
We're still looking at the same map? Okay, I got to share. All right. Can you see this map here?
Yes, now we can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So this is Komischeit today, or 10 years ago, in 2010. Okay. These are the new houses that were built. This is Komischeit Straat, which is the main street. This is that main street there. Okay. And this particular area here was where there were three soldiers. There were three soldiers that were found. Lemuel Herbert, Edward Jones, and John Farrell, Jack Farrell. Okay, they were found here. And these soldiers were pretty much right here. Okay, so they were found accidentally. They weren't found by the U.S. Army. They were found accidentally. Somebody was doing some renovation work on their house and digging up the yards. And lo and behold, the metal detector pinged, and they dug and found hand grenades and the armor, the metal guns of these soldiers. Many of these soldiers were buried with their guns. And so this is the way that they found these soldiers. And so by accident. And so what prevents you from doing your own research and going here and ringing the doorbells of these houses? Can you see this? Okay. The map. Okay.
Yes.
The old map. Okay.
Or
so,
no, not the. Yes,
not the Google map. I pushed the Google map to the side, but you can go to these houses. Okay, I'll put the Google map on. You can go to these houses and ring their doorbells and say, if you want, you can take a German translator, but many of them speak English, and say, excuse me, I have an uncle or a dad or a grandfather who may have died around here. His name was, Sidney Weaver. Do you know if there are any unmarked graves in your backyard? This is exactly what happened. This is where Edward Jones Edward Jones and John Farrell was found. They were two sergeants in the same unit. They were fighting next to each other, and lo and behold, they were buried right next to each other. And while they were excavating this area for some new construction, these two graves were dug up right here. And so, these other soldiers, Sidney Weaver and Mark Wilson and some of these other soldiers that were mentioned in the book, they're right around here. So you can just go into this small little, what is this, a 1 block area here, ring doorbells, and there's a pretty good chance, that you can find your soldier before the U.S. Army does. Because I'll tell you this, there are 70,000 soldiers missing from World War II. And there are about 163 to 170 soldiers still missing from this particular battle. And it takes about $1 million or so to find one soldier, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And every year, they find maybe altogether about 70, 100, 120 soldiers. And so if you have 70,000 soldiers that are missing, you're going to have to live for 500 years before they will get to your soldier. So I'm going to put my neck out and say something really controversial that the Army will not like, which is that you can do exactly what I did and try to go and ring doorbells. And I have already told the families whose stories I've told in the book. I've already told them what addresses to look up, because I've done that research, and they can, if they're willing enough, if they're brave enough to do, they can just go and ring doorbells and find their soldiers. After you find your soldiers, then the Army has the responsibility of sending their grave units and disinterring them, transporting them back to military bases, and then having military funerals at a cemetery of your choice, all at the expense of the Army. And so, that is possible. I know of 5 cases where researchers have found the remains of soldiers before the Army has. Three of those soldiers were found just last year, not by the U.S. Army. The U.S. Army right now is trying to find soldiers the easy way, which is by going to cemeteries and looking for unknown graves, soldiers of unknown graves, soldiers of unknown, the unknown soldiers, grades of the unknown soldiers, and doing DNA tests. So they test the family for the DNA, they test the bones and the remains for DNA. If there is a match, then they reunite, they repatriate the soldier, the remains of the soldier. Does that answer your question?
I believe so, yes.
I'm giving you long-winded answers.
Okay.
That's quite all right.
So it's okay.
Unfortunately, at this point, though, I think we may, I don't know, Ed, what do you think?
Yeah, I think we probably should move along. We should probably leave the share screen for a little bit, maybe, unless Joe's got something else he wants to show here.
No, I have just overrun my schedule.
No, that's perfectly fine. But as you know, the story just gets people going, and we could. I will say, if you haven't read the book, he's given you ample reason why you should read the book. It's got more in its 225 pages than a lot of books at 500 pages have, and just in terms of how much it covers and how many different things about this remarkable story and all the angles of it that it covers. And coincidentally, if you would like to read the book, we have a way for you to be able to do that. Through the generosity of Uncle Sam Ronceville and Gene Kenny, we have a supply of the books available, and we will be happy to get you a copy, personally autographed by Joe, in return for a contribution to the Historical Society. So what we want to do is, if you would like a copy, personally autographed, he'll personalize it for you. You can tell him who you'd like it made out to, the whole bit. We would like you to write to our email. This is how we're going to do it. I will put that up as soon as I figure out how to share a screen here. I bring this up. Can anybody see that, or nobody can see it at the moment?
No, you need to go and
we need to go to the share
select
screen.
which screen you want to share.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Here we go. Okay. So our email is info@quincyhistory.org. Just please do it this way. Send us the email. It'll make life, it'll keep everything kind of flowing easily. and just make a pledge like you would if you were calling PBS or something like that, or public radio. Just tell us what you would pledge to make this, and then we will get you the book. You can get us the money. We'll talk about how you do that, and you'll get this really remarkable book, and you'll help us out. As we all know, it's difficult times for all, so we will be most grateful for anything that the people will do to help us, and we'll be getting a terrific book in exchange. Anything you want to, anything, Alexandra, you would want to say in addition to that about this?
Not specifically about the promotion, aside from, it's a great book, and I hope everybody, or that people do take advantage of this promotion. One last thing is that I just do want to say, apologies to the people that we didn't get to. We had one or two final questions that we didn't quite have time for, so I apologize to those individuals. And also for those who sent in comments and emotional responses about the book and about this topic. I will pass those on to Mr. Pereira, so I will make sure that he sees those and he can read those, and because I found some of them very, very moving and interesting and engaging. So I'll make sure that he gets them.
Alexander,
we'll make sure that he's, go ahead.
Can I interject here? If you really feel a strong, feels very strongly about the book, there is, I really am looking forward to reading them, but there is a forum where you can have a large audience, which is the amazonbook.com, amazon.com website, where you can post your comments there, or you can go to Barnes & Noble, you can post your comments there. I think those are the two major sites. I wouldn't do it on Walmart or Target, which is also places that you can post your comments. But if you can let other people know, which is my primary reason for spending time with you, which is I really want people to know about this story, about the stories of these families and these very, very brave men who made it possible for us to have the democracy that we have today. And I think the more people, the more voices that can be heard, the more powerful the message will be. If you haven't bought the book, that's fine. But if you have comments, you should post them.
Very good advice. Also, I would just remind everybody that the Historical Society has a Facebook page, which is Quincy Historical Society, and it's the ampersand and not the word and. Quincy Historical Society and Museum, and we will offer that as any kind of forum for any further discussion. We'll make sure that Joe gets all the comments, and we can use that to relay back any thoughts you may want to convey to anybody. We'll be happy to serve as a conduit for that. So please, if you're not in the habit of checking out our Facebook page, please do so for this reason and for others. Okay, so we'll make sure everybody gets a comment. Again, please, info@quincyhistory.org. And just state your pledge, and obviously make sure we know how to get in touch with you. And we'll be happy to get a autographed copy of the book to you. And I thank Joe for a very passionate and very very involving presentation about this remarkable. I don't want to say remarkable too many times, but I keep coming back to that this is not known, the human impact of it, and also some of the other implications of it are really something that people should know about, I think. And so we thank you for that and for making it so vivid for us tonight. Alexandra, any final comments?
Nope. I think you've covered it all. Yeah. So yeah.
And now you can go back to the theater on Pennsylvania Avenue.
Right. And thanks everybody for everyone who came and tuned in. And we will have another one coming up in about a month. It's also going to be another World War II thing. Because of the pandemic, we did not mark the 75th anniversary quite in the way we wanted to. So like this program, we will also be catching up, and our one of our familiar speakers, Bob Began, will be doing it, and we'll send you the details out. Again, that will also appear on our Facebook page, all the details about that. Again, Joe, thank you very much. Thanks to everyone else who's here. And I think, yes, time to see what else is going on. Thanks for coming. Thank you.